Like to always share. I like to share things every week that you may never have known, that these are facts or issues, things that you might not have considered. I love sharing, stuff that you just may never have realized. Tonight, that might be a little hard because this is a history that you've lived with your own eyes. You've experienced it. You, I might remind you of some things that you've forgotten or weren't maybe didn't put into the proper and maybe in the right word proper perspective, but didn't put into the kind of way of thinking about things. But uh, so I'm gonna state something right now that might be obvious on one hand, but also maybe you haven't thought of, which is that everyone here right now, most of the Jewish people that you have met in your life, pretty much, well, anybody that you've met, you have lived in the golden age of Jewish America. You've lived in the golden age of a significant Jewish community that was at the center of the most important country at a historic period in the world. And you've lived through it. You've lived through most of it. You almost everybody you know who's Jewish has been a part of this. And so, on one hand, it's one of the most obvious things, but on the other hand, it may not be obvious because usually when we think about history, we think about ancient history, we think about historical periods that we kind of assess, make statements about. And when you live through that history, and as I'm going to show you, there was an article that came out last year in the Atlantic magazine, which I think is the best reflection on this history. When you've lived it, when you've lived through it, you oftentimes aren't aware of it because you need some distance from the time to make that assessment. But this is a fact. Will it be the greatest Jewish period of all time? That will take time. That will take time to assess. There was a golden age of Judaism during the Spanish period about 1,000 years ago in Cordoba and Sevilla and that part of Andalusia in Spain, controlled by Muslim leaders, but a place where Jews, Muslims, and Christians all came together. An amazing life, amazing culture in Spain during that time. Cordoba had more people living in the city than any other city in Europe. One of the largest cities in the world. I mean, you have to kind of go across all the way across the world to China, to the Song dynasty, just to find a city that had a similar population of Cordoba. Uh, and the Jews were at the center of that and made up probably 10% of the population, very much like New York. That happened a long time ago, and the effect of it also, it's difficult to say, how important it was in world history. And it'll take time to assess how important this period of the American Golden Age, which also corresponded with the Jewish Golden Age in America, it'll be interesting to see how long it takes to make that assessment. Maybe it takes 200, 300 years to say this was one of the greatest periods of creativity and technology in history. We don't know. It could be said, maybe not. Maybe we'll have to take some more time, and maybe the future and um, the technological and cultural achievements there's bigger ones yet to come. But it is safe to say that from about 1920 till about maybe 20 years ago, it's difficult to say when this period came to an end. Most people would say after October 7th, the assessment is it's over. But when you've lived through that, and for most of us, that's the bulk of our lives, it's difficult to really comprehend that you've lived through an amazing period. I guess to some extent, you have to almost be able to say it's over to assess when the period was. And I would have been hesitant to say that it ended until a couple of years ago, and then I would have said, yeah, it's definitely over. The article that I'm going to share with you in a bit makes the argument that it ended on actually September 11th, 2001. Around that time was around the time that the Jewish Golden Age in the United States came to an end. But maybe not that date, but there are definitely arguments that in the last 20 years, 25 years, it has definitely come to an end. Maybe again, it took a few years to see it come to an end. We talked about the last session. We talked about the emergence, the beginnings and emergence of the American Jewish community, and we kind of looked at the three periods that brought Jews to America. The Sephardic period, the first period where almost all the immigrants who came to the country during the colonial period and the Revolutionary War period were Sephardic Jews. Then came Jews that started immigrating to the United States primarily after the Napoleonic upheaval in Europe. During that period, most of the Jews came from Germany and the areas that had been part of that had been Germany or becoming Germany. Because remember, Germany didn't exist until after till this period. A combination of German city states and many Jews in that upheaval came to the United States. That's the next level. And then, of course, that is nothing compared to what happened during the 1880s to the 1920s when we had a period when most of our ancestors came just before World War II, which was the Jews who came from the Russian Empire responding to pogroms and the Russian Civil War, that they came to the United States in immense, immense numbers that completely dwarfed. If in the 1880s there were about 300,000 Jews in the United States, we mentioned, in the Civil War period, a couple 100,000. By the end of by the eve of World War II, there's about 5 million Jews that live in the United States. I mean, that's a whole different community. And that's mostly our families. Those are the people who came from Russia, Poland, Ukraine, those areas, Hungary, those places where our families came from that oftentimes were part of the Russian Empire. So that's what we looked at last week. Today, we're going to be looking at this period, where, as you can see, the Jewish community has continued to grow, but for the most part, the growth is actually in relative terms to the United States. Obviously, our population percentage has gone down, and this is fairly close to what we would have as normal growth rates in a country, especially a country where we're doing so well. One can make the argument it's actually not a tremendously large growth in real numbers, in actual numbers. But there were about 500,000 Jews. Now there's about 8 million, just under 8 million. Um, of course, that Jewish community has changed a lot demographically, which we're going to mention today. So when we talk about the end of this period of immigration, when this immigration kind of comes to a halt, which is right about here, it is not because of the Holocaust. It is 1924 Immigration Act, which causes the gates from the Russia. I would say, the World War One is over. There's still upheaval in that area. Um, there's still instability in the new Soviet Union, but Jews are no longer going to be allowed to come into the country. During this period, from about 1925, 24 to 45, virtually no Jews come into the country. It's a trickling in of Jews, primarily again. Um,
Who was president then? 24.
so, in the initial presidents where this happens, are the initial reactions to this are during Woodrow Wilson's administration and all the way through Hoover's administration. These are Democrats and Republicans that decide to pull the plug on Jewish immigration. They also pulled the plug on Italian immigration. It wasn't just Jews. I want to make it clear.
Wilson
But
was a Democrat.
yeah,
And
Yeah,
Hoover was a Republican.
Republican. Yeah.
And
And
he
then
had
and FDR. Let's not forget he
right,
he
Yeah, yeah.
was
right.
he
Well,
was
well,
there for eight years,
a
longer
hundred
than that.
percent, 100%,
Okay.
and it didn't change during that time. And one could make the argument that that is when it should have changed when the Holocaust started. But I want to make the point: it did not. The Immigration Act was not because of the Holocaust. It started 15 years before World War II started. It happened before Hitler even came to power in Germany. Technically, Mussolini was in power in Italy, but it had nothing to do with the politics of Europe. It had to do with the politics of the United States. And during this period of time, we have after World War One, we have a very strong isolationist movement in the United States. We have the rise of the KKK. We have a real concern that as industrialization is taking over and creating an urbanization and these large cities, that the United States is really being pulled in some interesting political um, directions, which are not that different from where we are today for different reasons, not necessarily industrialization, but changes in what's happening with people's um, communities, right? What's happening with people's occupations. That oftentimes when they're going through tumult with their work and with their lives, that oftentimes it creates political instability. Well, I want to make it very clear. There was also rampant anti-Semitism during this period. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that Jews had become very successful very quick in the United States. Why? Because we finally found a place where people would leave us alone and let us do our best. Seriously. We found a place where people said, "Hey, you work hard, you do your job, you'll be kind of rewarded." And so what happened was um this is an interesting this is a chart that I want to show you at the end too. That by the 1930s, Jews made up about 10% of the population in at Yale, but mainly because at that point Yale said we're not going to let more than 10% of our university be Jewish. That continued all the way until the 1970s. In that period, in the 60s, it started in the 60s, where those quotas were eliminated. But they existed for about 30 years. It took about 30 years for the quotas to be eliminated. The quotas were happening at the same time the immigration quotas were put into place. So this wasn't just immigration, right? This wasn't just a response to isolationism. This was flat out anti-Semitism. And so,
Were there quotas against Asians,
no,
Italians,
not during this period. Not at
just,
the
just Jews?
not at these universities. These were directed specifically at universities. And I'm telling you, this affected one of the greatest physicists of all time, Richard Feynman. He literally couldn't get into, he wasn't going to be allowed to be in good into Princeton because he was Jewish. They actually had a discussion about letting him in, and he was already a brilliant student. They didn't know whether they were going to let him into Princeton because of their quota. And they basically said he's not a very religious guy. It still didn't matter. They had a discussion at the highest levels about whether they were going to let this guy into their university. So this is real. I mean, like this really affected people. And I talk to people all the time who have a parent or maybe a grandparent who were affected by this. You know, this is not this was not just immigration policy, is what I want to tell you. Now, that's why when we talk about a golden age, like we were coming out of a period of time in the 20s when our numbers reached the critical mass, but we were still facing tremendous anti-Semitism. And so um, there's one other point I want to make here too, which was on a practical level, it wasn't just the universities that weren't letting Jews into the colleges. I mean, To understand that a college would have a policy of not letting more than 10% of the university be Jewish? I mean, think about that for a second. This wasn't a secret. These were stated policies.
Wow.
Sure. So it affected people. And when Jews were at the same time not allowed to have privileges as a doctor in a hospital, we created our own hospitals, right? So Cedars of Lebanon Hospital, which later became Cedar Sinai, was a Jewish hospital created in Los Angeles so that Jews could practice medicine. And every city had a hospital like that for Jewish doctors. Every city had a Jewish country club because Jews weren't allowed into a country club. Every city, whether it was Hillcrest here in Los Angeles or I can't remember the one in Westchester. Every city, every community had a Jewish country club because Jews weren't allowed into the country club. And this was a reality. There
You
were
have like a
areas.
green book, like Black's
Yes,
got?
but we had red lines that kept Jews out of certain communities. Jews couldn't live in La Jolla. These were facts. These were established these were established quotas and these were established red lines, and these were established policies that everybody knew, and they just did it, and they got away with it. One of the great movies about this in the United States was, of course, Gentleman's Agreement, which was a movie that, if you recall, starred Gregory Peck, and he plays a GI who is friends with a Jew who tells him what he's dealing with as he comes back from World War II, and tells him basically what happens to Jews not being allowed to get jobs, not being allowed to get into certain things. And Gregory Peck pretends to be Jewish so he can document this. So Gentleman's Agreement came out in 1947. It was a really important movie in exposing and discussing this on a bigger level. And of course, it had one of the great actors, Gentile actors of the time, advocating for it, and as a proponent for, ending this, and it did end. And so what happened was these types of acceptable forms of established anti-Semitism came to an end. And they came to an end partly, as you see in Gentleman's Agreement, because one of the arguments that's made in that movie is American GIs, a million of them were Jews, and they fought and died for this country. Now, of course, there were racists who said they fought and died to stop the Holocaust from happening, but everybody knew that the war in Japan had nothing to do with Jews. The Jews who died in the Marianas or at Iwo Jima or anywhere else, they died as Americans defending America not from anti-Semitistic, anti-Semitism, Nazis and anti-Semitic Europeans. And so that had a tremendous effect on changing the minds of the average American. It did not happen overnight, but I do believe that a large part of it was World War II. I also do believe that middle America, Americans who didn't necessarily know a Jew, I do think that a lot of them were, when they saw what happened in the Holocaust, they understood that uh, the anti-Semitism, taken to the extreme, kills people. And I do think that had an effect on average, ordinary people who just said, "Yeah, these forms of anti-Semitism will not stand anymore." That was part of it. I really do believe that's part of it. How do you quantify those feelings? It's very difficult, but we know that changes about, and I'll show you one of them in a second, that those changes happened. People started changing their opinions on Jews. I'll show you one just interesting one in a second. Part of also what happens here is that when Jews become members of their own country clubs and when they start to organize politically, something happens, which is they start exercising power. They create Jewish federations. They create Jewish organizations that lobby on behalf, like AIPAC, will lobby on behalf of Israel. The dynamic changes partly because feelings change, and I think World War II had a huge impact both in the integration of Jewish soldiers and in the feeling that Americans had with seeing what had happened during the Holocaust. But it also was a reflection of Jewish success. Because as much as anti Semitism existed during the 20s and 30s, as much as it was a reality, you now have another generation of Jews that, for better or worse, and I'm going to tell you this, I honestly believe this, for our parents and grandparents, these quotas and these red lines that kept them out of certain communities. Come on, folks. Your grandparents, not your parents, your grandparents and your great grandparents, come on. They lived through pogroms.
They paved the way for us.
They lived through pogroms. For them, this kind of stuff, I don't want to say it was a joke. It wasn't a joke. It was real and it affected people's lives. And if you didn't get to the university that you wanted to go to, and you didn't get to have the life that you were supposed to have, that was real. But compared to what their parents, who came from Russia and Poland, lived through, come on, it was nothing. And so in this country, the Jewish community was able to start really becoming economically successful. And so I showed you this a couple of months ago when we looked at the history of the Jewish world. This movement of Jews from the Lower East Side, from here, from Manhattan, into the rest of New York. This happens, of course, across the country. The reason we point it out here is because it happens on a scale of millions of people. So as Jews start moving out to the suburbs, we see this not just because Jews wanted to, move into other places. They did it because they could afford to do it, folks. They did it because they were successful enough to get out of the tenements that they lived in Manhattan. And they moved to Brooklyn, and then they eventually moved out to the island. And this happens, of course, across the country. And of course, so many of the people here in New York obviously decide they want to come to the Western United States after the war, and they make that move out west. So the community is also, okay, this was because of these horrible immigration laws. What is happening to the American Jewish community now? It's becoming less immigrant and more American, right? Because of the law that resulted in less Jews coming to this country, the country now has people who are first and now second generation Jews, you guys who are not immigrants, who are American. And this really does see now, as we get into the 50s, 60s, and 70s, we now see Jewish people who feel very comfortable in America. They operate with it as an American with American identity. And we mentioned before, look, the rise and the success of Israel after the 60s. We just talked about Israel over the last couple of weeks. The feeling that Jews in Israel are doing well after the 67 war. This happens at the same time in America where American Jews are now having their great moment. And when we talk about what's happening to American Jews during this time, we're seeing Jews take on amazing roles in culture, in politics. We have a situation up until a few years ago where at any given time, 15 to 20% of Congress is Jewish. Almost always there's two or three Jews on the Supreme Court at all times. There used to be one Jewish seat. Now there's three Jewish seats. And that existed, folks, until when Breyer, Kagan, and Ginsburg were on. I mean, that was only a few years ago. And so this this golden age of our success was cultural, political, happened in sports. 67, we have this amazing war where Israel has a opportunity to to miraculously beat everybody. But what's happening at the same time here? I mean, you've got Sandy Koufax, the greatest pitcher in baseball, in 1965, decides he's not going to pitch in the World Series. 65? He doesn't pitch in the World Series? and 67, you have the war. I mean, this is happening at the same time. And it is a level of pride, of political engagement, of a really understanding that anti-Semitism that's at an all-time low, that this is really, I would say, if you want to look at kind of like mid to late 60s to late 90s, that 30 years is the golden age of American Jewry. And I will tell you that during this time, for better or worse, and I would say, look, it's a reflection of our success as much as it's a reflection of anything else. Um, oh, Quaker Ridge Golf Club in Scarsdale. Thank you, Schulman's.
Rabbi,
That is
this is
exactly what
the only idol I have. It's my Sandy Koufax bobblehead. It's my only.
it's an acceptable. I would
It,
say
it,
I give you rabbinic permission to have that as an idol. It's a great idol. I know you've got it. So this is what we also will look at here too, which is this is one of the reflections of Jewish acceptance. People don't just tolerate Jews, they don't just like Jews, they love us. They love us. And some people say they're going to love us into non-existence. But I'm not one that looks at this only as a negative. I definitely don't look at it as a negative. I believe there's a huge potential here. But when you look at these numbers, right? Before 1970, percentage of Jews with a non-Jewish spouse, 17%, folks. 17%. Today, it's a little bit over 60% now, around 60. It's hovering by 60%. It's been staying pretty close to 55 to 60%. It reached, I would say, kind of uh um in the 90s, by the 90s, when it reached 50%, it kind of reaches a max. It kind of reaches, it really can't go much higher than that, to some extent. And so that's where we are with the rate of intermarriage. I also want to show you this statistic. Another way of looking at the statistics. Let me just blow this up a little bit. This is another way of looking at it over generations, right? When we look at people who are, and this was done about 10 years ago, was the last time there was a really, really great survey of Jews, was 2013, that look at this statistic put in a different way. When you look at 17% intermarriage rate. By the way, that 17% intermarriage rate back in the 20s and 30s, 40s, almost all those people were not Jewish. The difference today is that of these millennials, the majority of them are actually being raised as Jews. So you can see even in Generation X, in Gen X, it was not that's my generation. Even that generation, it was not that common. Today, it's
I,
50-50.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Are they in these surveys when they say Jews? Are they differentiating between people who marry those who converted to Judaism, as opposed to people who were Jewish by birth?
No, that's a great question. This is actually parents when they ask that this is the Pew Research, and this is a legit, this is they're good. This is one of the top companies you go to, right? So this was done with the question of whether the people consider themselves Jewish. So you don't know for sure, but the assumption is that if somebody was asked if they were Jewish, whether they converted or born Jewish, it is not that they were born Jewish. Okay, it's just whether they identified as Jewish. So, that's a statistic that.
You can see here the growth of the reform movement too versus the conservative movement.
Do you want to see that statistic? It's not that interesting. It's basically exactly what you'd expect. It's not an issue. I'm just telling you
But the reform movement is much more open to.
there's no question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I will tell you this. the statistics, they don't usually ask this question, and so I'm just going to tell you it's more anecdotal, but it's people have there have been research studies. They're just not comprehensive, and I don't think they show they don't they're not I don't think they're scientific enough. So I'm going to say that from my experience and from the things that I've seen, I do want to say that the first wave of intermarriage was primarily Jewish men marrying Gentile women. And again, in many of those cases, the children were not raised Jewish. And that was pretty much the end of Jewish identity in those homes initially. It started changing in the 40s and 50s, where you had more and more Jewish men who either had their wives convert or felt strong enough about their Jewish identity that they basically said, we're raising our kids Jewish. And you started to see more and more people converting during that golden age. And again, is it anecdotal? Yes, but I mean, you can think of the people that you know, like Stiller and Mara, where Ann Mara converted, and the kids were raised, and the kids were raised Jewish. They don't, I mean, Ben Stiller talks about it, but that was an aberration. That was the norm, and you had people that were converting, and some of them were high profile people like Ann Mira, but it was more. I mean, she was nothing as far as celebrity compared to Elizabeth Taylor, who converted during this period of time. Marilyn Monroe converted in 54, though less people know about that because her marriage to Arthur Miller didn't last that long. But you had people who converted, who were again several high profile actresses and people. It wasn't just women. I mean, I know there's Sammy Davis Jr. and there's other people who converted who were well known, who went through conversion. But in many of these cases, um, people knew that it was happening, and it was, I think, to some extent reflective of this golden age. Um,
Would
yeah. Who
Judaism
wants
change to accommodate these people? You know what
what
I
was
mean?
that?
Judaism changed to accommodate these people. Reform movement made it easier to convert.
I,
People
I I
felt more
think I think yes, I think you're right. I think the Jewish community adapted. I don't think the
because
Jewish
everybody
community
was
I don't think the
conservative.
Jewish I don't think the Jewish community I don't think we adapted quick enough, but I do think we eventually adapted. But I think that uh the Jewish community adapted in the sense that they understood that there were more and more people that were in the synagogue who didn't grow up Jewish, right? And so who didn't have a lifelong understanding of Judaism. And so,
And we
I
used
think,
more English and more
yeah,
singing in our
yeah. And I think there was also this understanding that we can't take for granted that somebody, was raised in a Jewish home. So you can't say, well, you remember when you were a kid or whatever, you almost you don't even eventually hope, it doesn't even become a conscious effort where you really try to you really are doing something to make sure that everybody feels welcome and equal. And yeah, I mean but I
I
would
see
say,
different
Gail,
too.
I would say we were a little late. Many synagogues were a little late at understanding that.
I
Uh,
see a little bit different though in bar mitzvah training too, where in the boomers were we learned it by rote with a record. And there's a little bit more effort now in the reform movement of kids knowing what prayers are, what the meaning of the prayers they are, more English and more understanding of what they're saying and what they're doing
yep, yep,
versus just
absolutely,
collecting the presents and going home and never coming back to synagogue.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So this is an article that came out in the Atlantic magazine about 2 years ago, right after October 7th, about 6 months later, by Franklin Foer, who's a great writer, part of a really distinguished family of novelists and um, writers. And so, and he's actually, by the way, on the board of Safaria, who we use Safaria all the time for our Torah study and Talmud study. They're a great online resource for Jewish texts. Anyways, he wrote this article a couple years ago, now. It's hard to believe it was a couple of years ago, and it got a lot of discussion when it first came out. I definitely would say you should read it. There's not many things. This is you can read it. You don't have to have the Atlantic magazine. This is if you have Apple News, you can read it for free on Apple News. Just type in the Golden Age of American Jews, and you can read this article. This is a really well written piece about where the Jewish community is today and also where it came from. And I thought that this article, and he's a little younger than me, but he writes a very some very interesting comments about the Golden Age itself, which we're talking about right now. Um, and he basically says, of course, Ralph Lauren, is the style setter, and Dr. Ruth is giving sex advice on TV, and people are reading Elie Wiesel and they're watching Seinfeld. And this in this period of time in the 80s and 90s, Jews are everywhere, and it's just part of culture. And as he says, in 2000, Joe Lieberman, a Shabbat observant Jew with a wife named Hadassah, fell 537 votes short of becoming vice president. And as he says, none of these things would have made any news. That Joe Lieberman point right there, and Joe Lieberman of blessed memory was a really unique guy, in a lot of ways. Um,
You said
I would
those
say,
He
too.
was a
See,
mensch.
or
yeah,
Yiddish words. Oh,
yeah,
more
I would,
Yiddish words in regular, in part of American language, and Jewish food, bagels. Everybody knows what a bagel is. Everybody
yeah,
knows what a,
all of that happened during this period. Yeah,
yeah.
Well, there's no way today that today's Democratic Party, I hate to say this because I am a registered Democrat, there's no way today's Democratic Party would nominate a Jew
yeah.
for
So, so, so,
president or vice president.
so Philip just said what I was going to say, which is in 2000, I don't think anybody thought it wasn't going to happen. Uh, Now, I don't think anyone thinks it could happen. Not if you're being honest. So that's 25 years, folks. In 25 years, we can now, I think, safely make the assessment. And I think that I didn't have to make the point. I was going to say it, but Philip said it to me. He said it for me. And Philip's an intelligent guy who can tell you exactly what he honestly feels, which that's what I think is fair to say.
I'm not sure that's
So
true of Shapiro in Pennsylvania.
I don't think he can. I don't think he can win. I
There's
But
think your
I
your
think
your
he could be
your
vice president.
your point about whether he could be vice president or he should be vice president, I think is fair, right? I don't think it can happen. I honestly don't think it can. He actually, Esther, is the point. I'd love to be proven wrong. I'd love to be proven wrong. And if he winds up, I will buy you a Coke. No, I won't. I'll buy you whatever you want. I will tell you, I would love for that to happen. I think it would give tremendous hope, not whether or not I'd vote for the guy or anything else. It would give me tremendous hope that, and I'm an optimistic person by nature. It would give me tremendous hope that maybe the golden age, we maybe we're not quite there yet. But I just have this feeling like I don't think it can happen. Some people will make excuses. Some people will say, yeah, but there's a better candidate and blah blah. I don't think that's the issue. I don't think he can be. I don't think he can. I don't think he can make it on the ticket. Maybe I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I hope
no
something
look.
happens. I hope something happens.
Harris didn't pick Shapiro for one reason. No, look, he would have delivered Pennsylvania. She didn't pick him for one reason, and we know what the reason was.
I think it's safe to say that that is a good possibility. And I think Philip's right. I don't know. I don't think they would have necessarily won with just Shapiro, right? I don't think that would have changed the dynamic. I think it was an uphill battle based on. I, Look, I don't want to talk about politics here, but I do want to say this: as Jews, but also as Americans, I believe that when Americans feel betrayed, they will punish the party that betrayed them. And after the debate in July, Americans of all persuasions felt that they were lied to and that they were betrayed. And just like I don't care if Gerald Ford had been the best president of all times, there was no way a Republican was going to win after Watergate. I don't think there was any way that a Democrat was going to win after America saw how they perpetrated a fraud on the country by running somebody who was in no mental capacity, ability in any way able to be the president. And when
Yeah,
people saw that, they felt like they had been hit in the gut.
let me lay the
Okay, so
foundation.
that's the only political, and that's not even, I don't even say that as a Republican, as a Democrat, as an independent, as whatever. I'm just telling you, I've seen Americans of all persuasions, of all stripes, of all colors, of all religious backgrounds. We are a country that does not like to be lied to. And again, I know I don't want to get into, but there's a difference between being lied to and there's a difference of a conspiracy, a conspiracy and a manipulation of when people feel manipulated, you can lie to somebody, right? You can lie to somebody. Politicians do it all the time, and people almost, they know it's going to happen. But there's a difference between being lied to and being betrayed, being manipulated, where you thought there was one thing happening and another thing was happening. Anyways, sorry.
And wait, Josh Shapiro said and wrote his a memoir that a book he wrote that the Harris team asked him if he had ever been an Israeli agent.
Agent, I know.
How offensive is that?
There's no question. There's no question that to some extent, Philip, you've proven the point. Okay, that comment actually is bigger than anything else. When a candidate, when a Jewish candidate is asked that question by his own party, that's a problem. That's an indication that we're not where we were in 2000 in 2000. That actually is that even if he wins and gets on the, I mean, even if he gets on the ballot, the fact that that question can be asked tells you we're in a different
Wait,
moment.
last thing.
Yeah, yeah.
This is how stupid Harris's people were. They asked him, quote, have you ever communicated with an undercover agent of Israel? Shapiro responds, if they were undercover, how the hell would I know?
I, I, I know. But at this point, Philip, you're just, I know. Um, so, uh, it's not. I'd love to be wrong. I'd love to be. So this in this article, I just want to point out a little bit of I I would just say this is required reading for people, by the way. This should be every American Jew should read this to understand their history, to understand where we were and where we are, and maybe what we need to be aware of going forward.
Hey, Rabbi,
So, yeah, sorry. Yeah.
if if anybody wants a copy of it, I'll PDF it and email it too. Just let
Oh,
me know.
thanks. Yeah. If you could do that, you know what, John, if you could do that and pop it in the chat, I'd really appreciate it. That would be good. I'm not good at making the PDF of the articles. I've tried it before and I get like these weird long things that don't have they go on like 30 pages.
That's because you
Anyways,
use Apple.
if you can, yeah, that's true. If you can do it, that's awesome. All right. So, anyways, this article, he's just such a great writer, and he's intelligent. He brings in facts. Anyways, so this is the thing I wanted you to see. The point I was making before about what happened after World War II. Reality began to resemble the myth. In the years following World War II, and especially as the world began to comprehend the extent of the Nazi genocide, a liberal consensus took hold and anti Semitism receded. After Auschwitz, even three martini Jewish jokes at the country club felt tinged by the horrors. In 1937, the American edition of Roget's Thesaurus had listed cunning, rich, extortioner, and heretic as synonyms for Jew. Oh my God. Folks, the thesaurus that kids take to school with them in 1937. At
You're
that
dropping
time,
out. You're dropping out,
sorry,
by the way.
I'm dropping out because I'm choking.
Oh,
was-
don't choke.
Just as a reminder, who was president then?
Oh, okay, okay. But
I'm
this
never gonna
didn't
let
come.
that die,
He
ever.
didn't. He didn't make it happen, John. Come on. At that time, nearly half of Americans said Jews were less honest in business than others. By 1964, only 28% agreed with that assessment. It became cliche to refer to America as a Judeo-Christian nation. Quotas at universities fell to the side. And then he talks about Jewish writers that came during that time, and it also included Jewish musicals, and it wasn't just mass culture, it was New York intellectuals, it was science, and of course, you know this. Approximately 15% of all Nobel Prize winners are American Jews. Talk about how many Jews have won Nobel Prize. 15% of Nobel Prize winners are American Jews. So
You
we
know,
also, yeah,
I have to say, we're
yeah.
we're kind of lucky Elon Musk is not Jewish. That would just be the cherry on top.
Well, wait a second. Wait a second. When people look at, yes, the people who they look at to control the world, the good thing is if they look at them and say, well, they're Jewish. I'm sure there's people who think Elon Musk is Jewish. Yeah. Uh, but look, what are we gonna say?
Alex
Um,
Karp is Jewish.
there's
Right?
there's a lot of people that we could say.
He's
Uh,
controlling a lot.
Yes, I know, but not at Elon Musk level. Good. Look,
Volunteer? Really?
Mark Cuban is Jew. I mean, there's a lot of Jews who are successful in business, but there's
Cuban's
not.
Jewish?
Yeah, Elon. I mean, Mark
Hey,
Dell. I mean,
th-
Dell.
Huh.
thanks to Alice Sharp, getting through customs and immigration on a recent trip to Tokyo, to Japan, was really easy. It was all facial recognition.
Yeah. Well, I do want to say this article pointed out something too that I remember as a kid. Uh, my dad helped out a little bit with this. Was in 1978. ABC ABC. This wasn't on some Jewish network. ABC ran The Star Salute Israel at 30, a kitschy primetime variety show filmed in front of a full house at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion, right? Place where they host the Oscars. Look who was on that. Barry Manilow, Henry Winkler, Sammy Davis Jr., and Barbara Streisand did a remote hookup where she went back and forth and talked with Golda Meir. I remember this vividly, right? Two Jewish women kibitzing on American TV. And of course, Golda Meir had grown up in Milwaukee, speaks like an American Jew. Guys, could you imagine? Could you imagine in Israel at 75? It would have been held in 2023. Can you imagine a similar thing in 2023? In Israel at 75 on national television? Now, first of all, they don't make things like that anymore. I mean, in all fairness, these kind of shows they don't make them anymore, which
But
is
we can't even get Jewish night at
is
Dodger Stadium. Come
is
on.
good. Yes, exactly. But now look at the kind of world that we live in now. So you couldn't even imagine a network doing something like that.
You're making the
So
point of Dana Horn. You know that people love dead Jews.
yes, Dara Horn.
But you have a Jew running CBS, Barry Weiss.
I understand, but can you imagine Barry Weiss or any Jew in Hollywood or in television today having the insanity of suggesting that um, we're going to have a Jewish a celebration of Israel, a show celebrating Jews. So he makes the point. Franklin Ford makes the point that this ended on September 11th. Now, he says we didn't realize it at the time, right? It didn't hit us right away. But when you started to see, first of all, as he says, the terror attacks opened up a perpetual crisis, right? And he believes that that led to anti-Semitism, anti-Israel feelings, and whether it was conspiracy theories that the Mossad was involved in the collapse of the towers to the Jews got us involved in a war in Iraq, these conspiracy theories and these new ways of viewing Jews and specifically Israel were became part of the discussion, and so to some extent have never left. It's never gone. Um, and so this book
Wait,
he
wait,
came
wait,
out.
wait, wait, wait. Scroll back one. People need to read
Yeah,
that. And there's
yeah.
good reason for it. He writes the neocons, right? Bush was surrounded by.
I don't want
So I'm just saying there was good speculation for it. I'm not supporting it. I'm just
wait
saying.
wait a second. That's why, but John, that's why I'm saying yes. He points out that there was an element of truth that there were Jews involved in the Bush administration, that neocons had a predominant role in shaping the foreign policy at the time. But I mean, look, he acknowledges it, but if you're going to say, you know,
I'm just gonna I'm just saying. Listen, if there's
I know,
listen, I'm all for it. If
I
there's
know.
Zionists, go listen.
I didn't want to. Since you said it, let me then just point out Donald Rumsfeld took exception to the idea that Jews were pulling the strings. I suppose the implication of that is that the president and the vice president, myself, and Colin Powell just fell off a turnip truck to take these jobs.
Right,
I love
right.
Don Rumsfeld. I mean, he literally he just
Yep,
said it the way it was.
yep.
But anyways, what we get, of course, is books like Walt and Mearsheimer's books, who, again, these are people who are at Harvard and University of Chicago. These are people that are teaching our young people, right? Who are basically saying that American Jews are running our our government and are forcing us into wars for the sake of Israel. So I mean, I'm not saying that book was the beginning of what we have today, but it definitely very openly stated what today I would say is you hear all the time, right? Which is that Jews were fighting a war because of Israel right now. We're doing Israel's we're Americans are dying for Israel right now. We're paying for exorbitant gas prices for Israel. Look, I mean, we take it for granted, but this didn't, this was not said, at least openly. I mean, there were always people who said it. I mean, whether it was Pat Buchanan, in the 90s, there were always people who said it, David Duke. I mean, there were always people who said it, but not teaching at universities openly or publishing books like this. I would say it was going on in universities, but it wasn't being said, out in the public so much. Again, people can also point to the financial crisis, the 2008, 2009, the collapse of Lehman Brothers and so many other um, financial stalwarts that people looked at. Um, People blame Jews, right? We know it. We started hearing it, you know. 38 over 38% um, survey conducted through Stanford. Um, 38% of the country blamed the Jews for the financial crisis. So um, again, I'm not going to go obviously through the whole article, but um, this is kind of the world that we have gotten to today. I'll just show you. The last part of this article deals with the fact that on the left, he's because he, he really that part is really about um, anti-Semitism that you oftentimes the kinds of stuff you hear from the right, um, the Tucker Carlson type, we kind of group it under that. But the left-wing anti-Semitism that we see now is also based on what his point about this is that the age-old relationships, and they weren't age-old, they went back to the 50s and 60s, that Jews who had spent a lot of time advocating for civil rights have been betrayed by that community, who's basically now accusing them of um, of of genocide and of the worst kind of forms of anti-Semitism. That what we've seen on the left, his point is has been uh, brutal for us because we thought we had these relationships, and it turns out that the people that we supported have turned on us. And so I, I'm going to make the point this way. And again, this is no political, there's no political ramification of this. I'm just stating a fact and just psychologically what happens. The people on the right who have picked up who carry the mantle of anti-Semitism, for the most part, I'm just wanting you to understand this, and you know this, by the way. For the most part, these are anti-Semites who've always been anti-Semites. They are the last vestiges of the KKK. They're the last vestiges of white supremacy, and in some cases it's the same people who didn't want Jews in their country club, all of that. But these were not people that were ever our friends. You understand? These were not people that we supported or wanted anything to do with them. They were always our enemies. What's been hard on the left is that the people that we supported have turned on us, and so it feels even worse because we feel we've been betrayed. And that is, uh, look, at the end of the day, what difference does it make? If somebody hates you, they hate you. But it does hurt. It does hurt when it's come on the left because these were people that we supported.
Well, that
You
was
know,
that was the
we didn't talk that much about it when we talked about the 50s and 60s, but I wanted to say it now. The Jewish support for the civil rights movement in this country during the 50s and 60s was a result of Jewish success and Jewish pride, to the effect that during the Vietnam War, the reason why so many Jews were very active in the anti-war movement and in the civil rights movement was because Jews felt successful enough and stable enough and accepted enough to start advocating for other groups. You don't do that, to some extent. Just bear with me. You don't do that unless you've reached a certain level of success. And by the way, most people didn't do it. And the fact that the children of immigrants and the grandchildren of immigrants who came to this country with nothing went down to Alabama to advocate for Southern blacks is unheard of. It should be unheard of. It was unbelievable that these people were risking their lives, and as you know, gave their lives in some cases, like Goodman and Schwimmer, who were murdered in Mississippi. This was an example of Jewish success that allowed these kids who left their universities in the North to come down to the South on these freedom rides. That was a reflection of Jewish success too. And so when their children and grandchildren now have seen that those groups that we supported and that we advocated for, in some cases gave our lives for, have now turned on us, this is a terrible shock, and we have a terrible sense, or we should have a terrible sense of betrayal. So this is what we have now. This is the world that we have now. And again, what we've seen is Hillel, the Hillel chapters have been under, at The new school in New York, the student council, the student government attempted to throw Hillel off campus. They tried to get Hillel thrown out of the university because they are connected to Israel and to birthright. And so they attempted to get their Hillel chapter thrown out. The university, the administration stepped in and stopped it. But I mean, when your fellow students are trying to throw you as a Jew out of the school, trying to throw your group out of that's insane. I mean, that's a level of hatred and bigotry that, I mean, the fact that it's happening now and we're reading about it, it definitely feels like we've gone back in time. And this is not what we thought we'd be dealing with now in this country. So the fact that this is an Atlantic magazine, very important because the Atlantic magazine is definitely a bastion of liberalism in the country. There's obviously a lot of Jews that read the Atlantic, but it really is it's a very important piece, and it's one that was where it should be, which is in the Atlantic. So this is this is I think one of the most important things to think about today is, have we lived through? Have we seen did we live through it, and are we coming out of we come out of the Jewish golden age, the American Jewish golden age? Um, this diaspora community that we have here is still tremendously powerful. We're not done. We're not over. I just want to make it clear. Um, but the dynamic has changed. Any questions, comments? Any
Rabbi, what's the date of that article? I'm trying to find it.
March
Yeah,
2024, March
right. Yeah.
March 3rd.
Okay.
March, yeah.
Have you, Rabbi, seen the
March 4th.
story? Have you seen the story out of the University of Michigan, the indictments over what was going on there? It just happened today.
I don't know what happened today. What happened today?
8 people were indicted. There were 7 arrests. Hold on, I'm pulling it up. There was a campaign of violence to pressure the University of Michigan businesses over Israel ties. Yeah, very interesting. Federal indictment unsealed today.
So what?
Intimidation. According to federal indictment, the suspects are accused of coordinating attacks that included spray painting homes with messages such as Intifada and Free Palestine, leaving threatening notes on victims' doors, and damaging private property across eastern Michigan. The individual spent over a year allegedly engaging in a targeted, coordinating campaign of violence and intimidation motivated by October 7th, 2023 Hamas terrorist attack on Israel. They vandalized property, left threatening messages, and even violently attacked homes while children slept inside. They targeted University of Michigan leaders, elected officials, business owners, and a police officer.
Mhm.
There you go.
Yeah.
Those are not far-right extremists.
Yeah, no, I understand. Look, we're not seeing massive, we don't see massive immigration to, we don't see massive immigration to Israel, for example. American Jews are not, well, first of all, that's an interesting question. Where would American Jews go? Where would we go? Um,
Certainly not Canada or Australia, France.
No. So there's not many Western countries that we would choose to go to.
No.
Uh, I would say that we've seen more Jews make Aliyah in the last couple of years. But, in 2020, there were 2,200 Jews that made Aliyah from the United States. This year, there were 4,000. I'd hardly call that a, I'd hardly call that a mass exodus. You know what I'm saying? So Israel is definitely a country where if you're concerned about your Jewish identity and you're worried about the future of Jews in the country, then you make the argument that you could go there. And he talks about the fact that are there people that are going to leave the country? Um,
Israelis are dealing with being bombed daily.
I understand, and so we
And,
still have Jews that are making Aliyah, but they're
yeah.
not they're not flooding into the country. Most Americans still maintain a favorable opinion of Jews, right? We remain, he says the community remains prosperous and politically powerful, but the memory of how quickly the best of times could turn dark has infused the Jewish reactions to events of the past decade. When lights start flashing red, the Jewish impulse is to flee. And that's from Jonathan Greenblatt, who's the head of the ADL. So I don't know where we're going to go. I don't think, and this is the end of the article. I don't think I don't think we're going to go anywhere. But you know, what happens in this country is an interesting one. Uh, you know, his last line is if America persists on its current course, it would be the end of the golden age, not just for the Jews, but for the country that nurtured them. I think that's a fair statement, right? I would say that if life gets bad for us here as Jews, it's probably going to be bad for us as Americans, and it'll be bad for other Americans too. The This is not the end of the American Jewish experience. I do believe it's fair to say that it's the end of the golden age. It's the end of the pinnacle of our run, if you will, of being very, very successful and being very confident in our place and not worrying about anti-Semitism. Like if we look at the markers of success, I believe that we hit several of them, in the 70s and 80s at the height, and that many of those pieces are not gone. So I don't want to, I definitely don't want to scare people. I don't believe there's necessarily any reason to be scared, but to understand that the situation we're in now is different. I think it's important to understand that, not only because you want to live in reality, you want to actually deal with what's happening, but I also believe that it can help us better plan and better react to the things that we're dealing with. I hate to say that, like, we have to some extent prepare our children or grandchildren, the next generation for the reality that they're gonna encounter anti-Semitism. But I think it would be
Teach
I think it would be I
Holocaust.
think it would be naive and dangerous not to be honest with them, and not to prepare them, definitely prepare them for those kinds of responses. How should they be able to defend themselves as people who support Israel, for example, or how to deal with
Right.
charges of like what kind of anti-Semitic stuff they're going to see they're going to hear. And I think that, like, when we talk to, like, we're restarting our confirmation program, it's definitely going to be a bigger part. 15, 20 years ago, I might have talked about, when I was talking about what kids need to be prepared for, I might have said, you got to be prepared for to be inoculated, if you will. Inoculated, right? That's a good word. Inoculated against, for example, missionary activity. What to be able to say when somebody comes and tells you something about Jesus, and to be able to know what the Bible really says, and what Judaism teaches about Jesus, right? We would have prepared our kids a little bit more on how to deal with conversionary activity, right? Today, today, I would definitely say that talking to kids, we're going to be a lot more honest and open and try to inoculate our kids for some of this anti-Semitism that they're going to hear. It's
They
only
even teach
responsible.
the Holocaust in Santa Clarita?
What was that?
Do they even teach the Holocaust in Santa Clarita?
Yes, they do. It's California law.
It
You know, look, does
really
every kid,
well. A lot of people, I
does
guess,
every
don't know how to do
no,
it.
they have to.
Uh-huh.
Look, you know, we've kind of made sure that it happens, and we don't always know, right? We can't always be 100% sure, but yeah, it's supposed to. It's part of the curriculum in eighth grade and 11th grade as part of the American history. So
Okay.
we'll see. We'll see if that continues to be. That's California law now. Um, but talking to kids about some of the anti-Israel stuff that they'll hear, how that merges into anti-Semitism, it's important for our kids to know that. So, that's an example of having a realistic approach and to be honest about what's happening. You know what I'm saying?
No, I think that's true. And I see that reflected in when we talk about Jewish education. More and more
Yeah.
people are more concerned about teaching our kids about the resilience of our people. And
Yes, and that's a very important point too, Gail, that you make, which is that I think it's not just the information that we give them. Telling them, it's not just telling them that, this is how you answer somebody who says Israel does this. You know, it's not just that. It is the intention. It's the kavanah, as we say in Hebrew. It's the kavanah of teaching kids to some extent that Jew hatred is going to be part of their experience, and they have to be, that we're kind of a little bit, it affects how we teach. It affects what we teach, knowing that's part of their reality. And that wasn't a part of the reality when I was a kid. It wasn't part of the reality of what we taught kids, when I first became a rabbi. We didn't really thinking about it, about Jew hatred in their lives was not something that we had to think a lot about. I'm just
I think we
I mean,
sort of
that's
took Judaism for granted. I mean, being accepted in the United States. I don't think that, and I don't know that we did a good job of teaching resilience to a lot of our kids. We've had it pretty easy
yeah, well
and took
well,
it for
that's
granted,
true. That's true. That's true. No, you're right. That's true. And I think that we have an opportunity here to we have an opportunity here to maybe do some stuff that we should have done. But I do want to say that for all of us, um, you know, being in one reality and then finding ourselves in another reality, which is really what's happening, you know, we realize that, we've got to be honest about what's happening, and sometimes realities change. Sometimes what you think is going to be the way things will be, it isn't. And you know, you can be upset about it, but sometimes it's out of our control. So I definitely don't want to give up. I don't want to say that whatever realism, I wouldn't say pessimism. I don't have a pessimistic attitude, but a realistic attitude. I don't want to in any way anyone to construe what I'm saying is that, it's time to circle the wagons and have a different approach to Judaism because of this. But I do think that we have to be realistic, and we have to educate ourselves, educate our children, and also just realize that this is the dynamic that we're living with, and we have work to do. We have work. We have to probably spend a little bit more time educating our friends and neighbors. Sometimes we have to respond to stupid things that we see from a friend, who posts something on social media. Not that we have to do it in social media, but sometimes we have to pull them aside and say, "Hey, look, what you said, what you just posted is offensive." Sometimes we have to do that with people.
How
And
many unaffiliated Jews do we have, like in the San Fernando Valley or in?
say that again.
How many unaffiliated Jews do we have, like in the San Fernando Valley, or people that don't feel connected?
Well, that's a good question, and it's something that I probably we could have talked about a little bit more today, which is what does the American Jewish community look like? But we're
Oh,
really going to talk about it next week, I think, because next week we're going to talk about one specific aspect of Jewish American identity, which is affiliation and identity. So next week we're going to talk about Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, Reconstructionism, New Age Judaism. We're talking about different identities, and one of those identities is being unaffiliated, is not being a member of a religious community. So we are going to talk about it to some extent, but yeah, the majority of Jews now are not affiliated with a religious community. I don't know that that necessarily means that the majority of Jews would only identify culturally. That's a an interesting question and one that is asked. I don't think there's a really I don't think there's a really good way to measure that. They do ask the question. It's part of the Pew surveys. It's part of demographic surveys that the federations will do today. You know, whether you're a religious Jew or a cultural Jew, they'll ask questions like that. But I think the question is it's not just reduction. It's not only a reductionist question. I think it's a ridiculous question because I think people, once they try to put themselves into a box, oftentimes will just either go to lowest common denominator or just they don't really answer it. I think I don't think there's a way to answer it because it's such a personal question. The way somebody feels as a Jew, as the way their Jewish identity that they would describe it, I think is such a personal question. I think it's not an offensive question to ask. I know why people ask it, but I find it to be fairly fruitless because you know if you feel that you're a cultural Jew, that doesn't mean that you also don't have a religious impulse. It may be that you don't go to synagogue, and so you say, I don't go to synagogue, so I must be a cultural Jew. I just think it's such a ridiculous question to ask somebody because most people really don't have an easy way of describing what their Judaism means to them. And Judaism does mean religion, it does mean culture, it does mean ethnicity, it does mean it has a component of being a civilization, all of a philosophy, all of these things are there. And so, how do you balance it? How do you identify? Am I identifying what is the strongest piece of me? So I think the questions, and that's why I don't put much attention. Like I don't believe most of it, and it's not just that I don't believe it because it's depressing. Some of the information is depressing, but I also don't think I don't think it's right. I don't think it's really a true answer. So we'll look at the numbers. We'll look at some of the things that we think about. uh I have an interesting take on it because I follow the maxim. I don't care what movement you're a part of as long as you're offended by it, as long as you're as long as you're embarrassed by it. I think it was a great comment that Yitz Greenberg, who's technically an Orthodox Jew, but he said, I don't care what movement you're a part of as long as you're ashamed of it. And I think that those are the words that I live by. And I feel that way, by the way, too. uh, Politics. I don't care what party you're a part of, as long as you're ashamed of it, you're good with me. But that's that's my take on politics and religious affiliations to identity. Nobody should be so. I don't know. I don't know how you could be proud of any political party right now. I don't know how you could be completely proud of any religious movement within the Jewish community right now. I'm okay. I feel okay with saying I don't have any identity or affiliation that I'm willing to go to the mat for. But we'll talk about it, and I'll give you my take on where the movements are today and what they stand for, what they stood for historically, what they how they exist today, and I'll be pretty honest about it. So again, today I wish I could have shared more mind-blowing information. But again, maybe it's mind-blowing enough to know that we've lived through and maybe have seen the end of the golden age of Judaism and in America, of Jewish identity in America. But that doesn't mean we're done, and it doesn't mean that we don't have lots of other good things to look forward to. But when
But
somebody
how
tells you
does that go along with?
when somebody tells you you've lived through history, you usually don't believe it. But we know that you did. You know that you did. You should know that you did. All right. Sorry. What? Somebody said
I was
something?
just going to say, but it seems like such a combination of what feels, at least to me, of what you're saying about the golden age of Judaism and the golden age of America in general. So I think a lot of people are feeling both at once.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah. Oh no, there's no doubt. There's no doubt. And that's
And a
why
lot of non-Jews are feeling it as well.
that's why the end of the article he says, this is the end of the time when Jews should feel like it may be America as well. No, there is definitely that point. And again, I your
Rabbi,
your 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 point is well taken too, in a sense, Esther, that that's a hard thing to grapple with. If you think that our best days are behind us, that's a hard thing to grapple with. I would say, look, you know, I don't think it's a good piece of, it's not a good place in our minds to say it's all over, because it's not all over. But if we say that, we got to be realistic about what's happening, I think it's fair to say that if America has a true resurgence again, which I don't see another country, by the way, challenging us. That's one of the interesting things about this, is that oftentimes you'll see another country that picks up from the other country. We haven't had that yet. So for better or worse, um, that
Rabbi,
hasn't happened. Yeah.
So
There's no winner. There's no winner right now to bet on other than us right now, Esther, if I can say that in a positive way. I don't know if that's the most positive thing I can say, but if you want to bet on a winner, the Dodgers lost tonight 9-8. I'd still bet on them to win the World
you
Series. I
started
don't,
this
you know
session
what I'm
with
saying?
that. You're ending with that.
I'm
Rabbi,
ending with it. I always bring it back home. That's your job as a comedian, is to bring it back home. What?
yeah,
All right.
Rabbi, any comment? I don't know if you guys spoke about it earlier, the Brett Stevens address to the
No, no,
92nd
no.
Street.
And
We saw
something.
that.
I meant to say that the Bret Stevens and the Franklin Four pieces are required reading for every American Jew. The Bret Stevens is a video. I did not mention it. I was going to mention it when I started with the Franklin Four piece, that those two pieces are the only two pieces. But I did talk about the Bret Stevens before. We talked about it when we talked about it a few weeks ago, when I posted the link for the Stevens thing. It is up on our it's up on our website. If let me just post this up real quick
Is
as we.
that the same Brett Stevens at the 92nd Street Y that we watched a couple of months ago?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes. So we did talk about it then, and yes, and yeah, you were not there that day, Philip, but I do want to tell you that um we do have it gave us a lot to think about. Even if you don't agree with everything he said, I think it's very important for you to consider it. And I'm just going to post it up here for everybody to see, not just the Stevens piece, but the just for everybody to have the link of our um on our classes.
Hey, Rabbi,
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
do me a favor, email me what you have, because what I have is an archive today thing. It doesn't really come out that clean. I mean, it's fine for me. People probably don't
Oh,
know
all
what
right. No, okay.
Just email that to me, and then I can provide it back to you. And I
All
know
right.
the
No,
Shulmans want a copy of it.
I'll post it as well. I'll try. I mean, if I'll put it, maybe put in a little bit more time. But yeah, the Stevens 92nd Street Y is also for everybody to consider. It's about 20 minutes, and definitely sparked a lot of internal discussion within the Jewish community. And yeah, so
And
uh,
if you don't listen to Dan Senor, you guys really should, and you should spread.
yeah,
You agree with all the stuff or not? What it does, it's so intellectual. It's incredible.
yeah, Dan Senor's piece, "Call Me Back," is a really fresh and important look. Always up to date, talking about stuff. And it'll be interesting to see, John, what happens to the discussion when this war is over, or if this war will ever be over. Who
Yeah.
knows? It'll be
Well,
interesting
listen,
to see what happens.
just to take just one moment, if everybody will read or listen to the last one, the one that just came out on Sunday, I just listened to it. And I think his name is Tamir. He used to be a Macha in the Israeli, whatever. He says, if you think that the son of the Ayatollah, right, whose and I can't go through the whole list, right, but we all know whose total family has been killed. If you don't, and in that part of the world, we all know, right, machismo, right? It does Israelis too, right? If you don't think that he's going to hold that for the next, assuming he's in power like his father was for 50 years, God for everyone else thinks it's about Israel. They just need one bomb, just one bomb, intercontinental ballistic missile. And if you don't believe me, watch House of Dynamite on Netflix.
Yeah,
That's all.
All right. So this is the
That's
podcast.
all.
This is
Just
Call
why
Me
you won't
Back.
sleep. You won't sleep for 2 days.
Okay. So Call Me Back is Call Me Back.
Anytime,
John,
because you won't be
John,
sleeping.
I didn't sleep for 3 weeks.
Yep. I'm
3 weeks.
it is just so. Oh God.
So again, this is he's had Tamir and Mark on. He's had Mark on a lot. Mark Dubowitz.
Yeah, yeah. And Mark's great. He's been
Mark was on.
sanctioned by Russia
Yeah.
and Iran.
Yeah.
The,
So
the
Mark
dubious distinction.
Mark
Yes,
Dubowitz right here.
he's with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They do a podcast. I recommend it. And if you have a few extra dollars, you can donate tax deductible to them. They do
Yeah.
great work.
And you can see Mark, he's had Mark on, a few times. There's Mark. He's really he's a very sharp dude. So
Very sharp. Very sharp.
yeah, I think these are the kind of things again that and when we talk about how to prepare ourselves and how to know what to say, these guys provide the information, the real facts. And these are smart guys. These are not people to they're not people to trifle with because they know what they're doing. So yeah, definitely it's a great podcast to listen to. And again, next week we'll talk about the movements. We'll talk about why
Tell
we
me,
have movement, why
what's
we
the
have movement.
podcast again?
It's called Call Me Back.
Call me back. Okay.
Call Me Back with Dan Senor.
Thank you.
So
It's
it's
wonderful.
been really focusing a lot on Israel, but like I said, it'll be interesting. God willing, the war will be over soon. He might be going back to discussions about American Judaism, but looking at his podcast back in March, when we had when was it March when maybe it wasn't March. No, it wasn't March. When he had the discussion about Brett Stevens. Sorry, it was February.
Yep.
This was the Brett Stevens right here. He
You
had
should share that with everyone you know.
yeah. So it's a 36 minute
36 minutes. Yep.
36 minutes. So he ran during his podcast, he ran Brett Stevens. He put it up as part of his podcast. That's how important he thought it was. He just said, just listen to it. So that you can listen to Brett Stevens through through his podcast too. So then he had him on the week later, 3 days later, to talk uh, about what we should be doing as far as fighting anti-Semitism. So it's a very important discussion right now to have. It's definitely important for us as American Jews to prioritize how we respond, how we educate ourselves, how we spend our time as Jews. Unfortunately, now we're playing a little defense right now, right? We were not thinking about that, and now we are. So, thank you,
Incredible.
everybody. We will see you next week. And Friday night, our teens are helping to lead service, and it'll be a nice Shabbat with Rick and Addie and some of our teens. And Eat for TBA is at Panera
Tomorrow night, 4 to
tomorrow
8.
from 4 to 8. So Panera, have a sandwich or
Yeah, I got to send out an email.
soup or something. All right, everybody. Take
Good
care.
night.
Good
Thank
night,
you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Good night,
everybody.
all.
No.
Good night.